So as we did with the first round, we have a panel representing a variety of perspectives, and the topic for this panel is harmonizing education for local concerns with global issues. And you know, at PSU, knowledge serves the city, and what does that mean in a ever smaller global world? So we have 4 panelists. Palin Bashi is a faculty member in class and associate professor in the Department of World Languages and Literatures. She teaches Turkish language and culture and writes mainly about gender and nation in modern Turkey. Next to her is Professor Veronica Dujan. She is the Director for Academic Planning and Policy for the Higher Education Coordinating Commission in the state's Office of University Coordination. She leads the Commission's efforts to coordinate academic programs, degree pathways, and student success initiatives among Oregon's public universities. Felipe Ferrada is a student in the School of Education. He hails from Brasilia, Brazil, and he is a firm believer that education, particularly popular education, is a powerful tool for social change, and it is for this reason that he is currently pursuing a master's degree in education, leadership, and policy with a focus on critical sustainable education. And fourth, we have Derek Olson, Vice President of Regional Strategy for Greater Portland. He's a former Foreign Service Officer with the U.S. Department of State. He has worked on international trade and investment issues for the Oregon Business Development Department, and now works for Greater Portland, Inc., where he leads the region's implementation of Greater Portland Global. All right, so we will begin with Palin.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a privilege to participate. To make the best use of my time, I will read from my comments. We rightfully worry about issues of diversity, inclusion, and social justice. These are issues of our local teaching and learning conditions and our broader society. But these are also issues of our curriculum. The content of what we study cannot be divorced from global concerns of inclusion, exclusion, social justice. So how do we build linkages between local and the global? In teaching language and literature, context is everything, and not all contexts are the same. Questions of identity and belonging are raised in different, sometimes conflict-torn geographies, the Middle East, Europe, Russia, and so forth. While principles might be the same, issues of diversity emerge differently in global contexts. We cannot transpose Portland exactly in the same way to the entire world. Nor can we congratulate ourselves because we appreciate cultural relativity and are sensitive to difference. We cannot just start and end with ourselves. That creates a certain essentializing of identities too. I am the Muslim, I am the woman, etc. It turns us into well-meaning provincials who actually have a very little understanding of others in the world. What constitutes a minority in Portland might be a majority elsewhere. There are minorities even within minorities. In Turkey, a predominantly Sunni Muslim but secular country, diversity may mean making room for dissenting views or for a broader definition of Turkishness. In Bahrain, it may mean being a Shiite yet feeling mainstream. In Saudi Arabia, it might be being a woman who's able to drive. In Germany, it might mean being a Turkish-German worker who's well integrated. In poverty-stricken communities, diversity creates access to education. In war-torn geographies, it decides matters of life and death. What appears as a choice in one context might very well speak for a lack of choice in another. So what do we do? In order to be prepared for complexities of a global society, we should study communities and structures that empower or subjugate people. If social subjugation is not an unchanging quality of one group, this or that, but a modus operandi of power, our classrooms need to explore more than me, the here and the now. We should be constructing a truly international curriculum across the board. Finally, focusing just on identities and sheer cultural relativism might obscure broader structural questions which have given rise to issues of diversity in the first place. Remember, we value diversity because it represents a question of social justice. An international curriculum informed by common ethical concerns can open up multiple universes to our students. That is the very charge of producing global citizens, of being a university. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here today, and what I would like to do in terms of my comments is refer a little bit on the research I'm familiar with and the context in which I work right now. I think of globalization and the impact of globalization as a significant struggle between local economies, local countries trying to define what social well-being is for them in a context in which the global environment is rapidly changing. And it's rapidly changing on many fronts. Clearly, perhaps we are more sensitive to the economic front, but we also know about the movement of peoples and the sometimes clash of cultures, and sometimes the mingling of cultures and the synergy that takes place at the intersection to create a very much more creative and tolerant world than we could have imagined several years ago. As an educator, I'm particularly interested in education and educating of people so that they can remain resilient, relevant, and included in a rapidly changing world. In Portland, we are particularly sensitive to how we relate to the rest of the state. We are one of the key urban centers, and we are very much aware that the way we see the world may not be reflected in the rural communities, yet we are part of one state. At Portland State, we do have, I think, the honor of being a receiving institution that has students from all over the world, some populations coming from a refugee experience, some populations coming by choice. And what it gives us as educators, instructors, and students in the classroom is an opportunity to have interactive thinking, critical thinking, that really bears on the significance of the role of urban centers in a rapidly changing world. And I say that being very much aware that urban centers were once thought of as the scourge of sustainable solutions, that they consumed a lot, they kept people in dense environments, and therefore could not be the solution. The thinking is changing. The thinking now is that if we can get people to live with each other in civil society in dense urban areas, it might be more possible to use resources on the outskirts, in the hinterland, and other places more responsibly from an environmentally sustainable perspective. What we do have the opportunity to do with higher education is to create the kind of complex thinking, critical thinking, that allows our students, and in turn ourselves, to be more resilient in a changing world, irrespective of whether we remain in local places or we travel internationally. And the implications of that for our students cannot be underemphasized, cannot be overemphasized. It makes us global citizens even as we are intentionally sensitive about local environments and local issues. It makes us more sensitive to social justice issues. And in the end, students get to decide their roles in a global economy. Thank you.
My name is Felipe, once again, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I think this question, the theme of this panel is really addressing a question of globalism, which entails like different ideologies of globalization. So with that in mind, I think it's really important to ask critical questions about what globalization really means. And also, what does it mean to be globally competent? I don't know if we actually have a definition of what that is here at PSU. And also, as someone who is interested in sustainability and connections to place, what does it say about our connections to place and sustainability? I think we must be really critical of globalist discourses because, in my opinion, they tend to be very neoliberal, capitalist, and neocolonial. So I think it's when we talk about globalization, talking about connecting local issues or local knowledge to global issues, there's a lot of assumptions that might play into those dynamics. So I think it's really important to ask the right questions in the first place. And one of the concepts that I'm really, I like to think a lot about and been grappling with for the last couple of years, and I'm trying to incorporate into the work that I do, both as a budding scholar and academic, but also as a community organizer, is the concept of glocalization. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. It's a conceptual portmanteau of globalization and localization. and it describes a world where global and local processes are not in binary opposition, but instead intertwined. So it's really about understanding that tension, the dialectic between the local and the global. And also taking into account the particularities of the local and regional when analyzing global phenomena. Can be really problematic. I think neoliberal enterprises are really good at being glocalized, about taking glocalization into consideration. But I think there's also a lot of resistance movements and social movements across the world, especially transnational movements, have been really good at incorporating this idea into the work that they do. I think the Zapatistas in Chiapas, the southernmost state of Mexico, is a really great example. And then also in terms of how do we actually talk about these issues in an academic setting, in a classroom setting, I think a lot of this has to do with the development that faculty have, or maybe the lack of development that some faculty have when it comes to social justice issues. So one of the things that I really hope that we can discuss maybe for later today and continue to discuss in our classroom settings and within our departments is faculty development, faculty training, especially around like culture competency, or the term that I like better, which is cultural humility, as well as social justice. What does it mean to be a social justice scholar, professor, instructor, whatever, however you want to define yourself? I think faculty, they need to come into a classroom with an understanding that students have important previous knowledge and experiences that you can't really separate those from academic content and skills. And those are just as important as academic formal training. So thinking about that as faculty and staff, people serving students, working with students, that's really, really key to me. And I think as an education promoter, is how I identify myself. I think it's important to make space for the full spectrum of knowledge in order to tie our experiences to larger social and global realities. And then what that means to me is that my role would be to act as a learning experience facilitator, community builder, listener, and fellow participant. I just want to end my thought real quick with a quote by Noam Chomsky, a scholar, activist, and renowned thinker. He says that globalization is the result of powerful governments, especially in that of the United States, pushing trade deals and other accords down the throats of the world's people to make it easier for corporations and the wealthy to dominate the economies of nations around the world without having obligations to the peoples of those nations. So that kind of summarizes a lot of my ideas around globalisms and globalization and what it means to be an expert locally in relation to global issues. Thank you.
Thank you again. My name is Derek Olson, and I'm Vice President of Regional Strategy at Greater Portland, Inc. I'll have a slightly different set of topics to highlight here in a couple minutes because I do come from a non-academic background, although both my parents are academics, so I'm very familiar with the give and take. And it's exciting for me to see you tackle this. I come from a perspective of someone who grew up here when this frankly wasn't that global in an outlook of the metro area here. Lived back east or overseas, for about 20 years, and then came back to return to an area that had been increasingly connected globally in exciting ways. And so for me, it's really inspiring to see students and professors at PSU grappling with this. As some of our panelists have pointed out, that's not always good things when you're connected globally, but I think we need to deal with the reality and look at where there are opportunities either for our region to benefit or opportunities to help improve the situation. My current work in the last several years has really focused around issues of international trade and investment with the Brookings Institution out of Washington, D.C., that has done a lot of research, not only with U.S. metros, but metros throughout the world that are looking, as one of our speakers said, to be really, it's the hub of the economy and the future of the world in so many ways. And so what are some of the innovations? What are the ways in some of these metro areas are becoming, in the words of Brookings, globally fluent cities? And Portland and the region has some areas where we're strong in and others that we aren't as globally affluent as some of our more experienced metros, both U.S. and internationally. So it's been exciting to see some of those ties grow, to see whether it's at the university or the strong nonprofits we have in this region, the Japan American Society, the Northwest China Council, the World Affairs Council, which I serve on the board, and that tries really as its mission to help connect Oregonians with the world. And I think there's an opportunity to take some of this data, whether it's on economic issues and what's the impact of international students here, as was mentioned, where there's over 2,500 approximately at PSU, and which is a huge impact. Over $480 million a year is estimated the impact of foreign students here, which most people don't realize. Or what about domestic students studying internationally and gaining some of those experience, which we tend to not do in the numbers that international students come here? To grapple with some of those, and what does that mean, and how can you positively influence international businesses to engage in some of the social justice questions that we're talking about, as well as the policy arena. So I think it's great that you're struggling with this. I encourage you to look at, to follow up and look at some of the data, especially from Brookings, because I think it's very helpful to help ground some of these discussions in both the positive and the negative, and what it means for you as future leaders in grappling with globalization. Thank you very much.
Let's thank our panelists. All right, just a couple of quick announcements. We're going to have about a half hour for table discussions, and if you would like to move from one table conversation to another table conversation, this would be the moment to do it. That's just an invitation. You could just subtly say, I'm going to go somewhere else, and that's how it could be. So we have till about 12:15, and at that time, I'll announce our lunch break at that time. So go ahead on the second question.